In 1986, a brand new studio named Westone, it's Westone, and they were called Escape at the time. Anyway, Westone released a little arcade game named Wonder Boy to Japanese arcades in April 1986, and it hit the rest of the world later that year. And thus began the confusing lineage of one of Sega's most frequently featured but far from the most popular franchises. And trust me, I mean confusing.
A lot of you have probably never played a Wonder Boy game, but you're probably familiar with something the series has spawned, because these tentacles spread far. So, since I had to sort a lot of this out by myself since I became interested in the boys a year or so ago, I'll share the fruits of my research with you. Because this dragon hole goes deep. History of Wonder Boy.
As I said at the start of the video, the Wonder Boy series began with the self-titled Wonder Boy in 1986 in Japanese arcades. The game follows the hero, Boy, who I guess is a wonderful boy or something, on a quest to save his girlfriend Tina from demons. Oh, but if the name of the protagonist sounded wrong, that's because his name was changed to Tom Tom in the Master System port, and it's always been Book in Japanese. Is that Bach? Bach? And Tina was renamed Tanya.
Trust me, this is far from the last time we will be dealing with name changes.
If you want my opinion on the game itself, it's alright. Controls are heavy, Boy has a lot of momentum, and the level design has some real tight jumps, but for a mid-80s arcade game, it's not bad. We have to assume that Wonder Boy did well, seeing as it got ported 9 times with an appearance on a compilation to boot. For convenience's sake, the version you've been seeing is the Master System port, but that wasn't the game's first appearance on a Sega console. Actually, the very first port was on the SG-1000, which necessitated the Japanese Master System port, or I suppose that makes it the Mark III port, to be renamed to Super Wonder Boy. Thankfully, because we never had an earlier port, this change was not present for any other region. For the following Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, and ZX Spectrum, all is well. Thus marks our first stop on the line. Our first complication comes with the NES port. What, a Sega game appearing on the NES? Well, aside from the fact that Shinobi and Afterburner did release on the NES, while Sega retained the Wonder Boy license, Westone retained the usage of the game code and engine, so if they wanted to release a port without Sega's approval, they'd be forced to use a new IP, and that's where Hudson Soft comes in. You probably already guessed as much, thinking to yourself, this game looks really familiar, and that's because it is. The NES port was released as Adventure Island, which of course spawned its own extensive series, and look, we're not getting into that. That's a whole other wormhole to get into. It's not a deep pit, but it's a pretty irrelevant one. Just know that it's our first branch. Oh, and the North American Game Gear version was renamed Revenge of Drancon. Even though this is the first game in the series, and Drancon has no reason to get revenge. At least, I'm pretty sure. I can't find the English manual to check. Oh, Drancon is what they renamed the villain, and I guess he's made of volcano smoke in this version. I never beat the game, so I can't confirm that. It'd make a great metal cover though, and a great band name. However, before the Game Gear was even a twinkle in Sega's eyes, Westone was already making a sequel to be released in Japanese arcades the following year. Producer and programmer Ryuichi Nishizawa was inspired by the recent trend of RPGs picking up in Japan, with the Black Onyx, Wizardry, and especially Dragon Quest, and wanted to incorporate some of those elements into Wonder Boy. So, the world of swords and sorcery hits the tropical Wonder Boy, now given the full name of Bok Lee Temjin, as he returns to protect Wonderland from the evil Mecha Dragon in Wonder Boy Monsterland. While the RPG influence is clear with the towns, equipment, and item shops, make no mistake, this is still a linear stage-based platformer that adheres to arcade staples like a time limit for each stage, and the Master System version having no continues that dampen the intended experience. From what I've played, it's an interesting experiment, but one that's not exactly fleshed out, with stiff controls and a pitiful attack range. Of course, that certainly didn't stop Sega from porting the game elsewhere. Here in the West, we know the game best as a Master System title, seeing as the arcade version never left Japan. Officially. From what I understand, bootlegs of the arcade cabinet existed in English territories where the title was slightly altered to Wonder Boy in Monsterland, and the prominence of that title necessitated the renaming of the home ports. Possibly. My only source on that is a Guru Larry video. But that ain't nothing on the Japanese version, which was released on the Mark III as Super Wonder Boy Monster World. Monster World.
Just keep that name in your back pocket for the time being.
While ports to Sega's consoles and various home computers were happening as normal, aside from the computer ports being called Super Wonder Boy yet again, Westone still had that agreement where they could license the game to other publishers so long as the Wonder Boy IP wasn't attached, which is how Monsterland found its way to the Famicom once again. Except, it wasn't Hudson responsible this time around, but Jellicoe, who made various graphical alterations to more closely align the game with Journey to the West, and released it as Sayuki World. And if something about the site of Sayuki World nags at the back of your mind, well, I don't know how you made that connection. But yes, the game received a sequel, Sayuki World 2, creating yet another series that started as a Wonder Boy clone and then dropped it for the sequels. But Sayuki World 2 was localized with another new set of graphics as Wampum, a game that makes me uncomfortable as to whether or not it should make me uncomfortable. But just because Jellicoe was holding down the Nintendo for it doesn't mean that Hudson wasn't busy with the game as well. Around this time, Hudson was putting a bunch of their chips in with the new PC Engine, as a launch title for that system, released a reskin of Monsterland, this time known as Bikuriman Land. Oh, Bikuriman is a line of snacks that was a big deal in Japan in the 80s, and their mascots graced merchandise, television, and video games. Other than that, it's Monsterland. The licensed nature of Bikuriman Land meant that it wouldn't see a Western release or a re-release, so when Hudson released another port of Monsterland for mobile phones in 2005, they needed another name. Super Adventure Island it is. Not to be confused with the other Super Adventure Island. Toss it down the Adventure Island Pit 2. Even the Master System version wasn't safe from being reskinned. Down in the wonderful Master System mecca that is Brazil, Monsterland was released as... give me a second here. Mônica no Castelo do Dragão, now with the characters reskinned to match a Portuguese comic known as Turma de Mônica, which has apparently been going for over 60 years now. It's not just a title change, the characters were redrawn to match the comic characters. For instance, Bach is now Monica. Oh, did I mention that the comic was a bunch of kids doing normal kid stuff in a contemporary Brazilian setting? Now go fight a dragon. However, it appears that Monsterland maybe wasn't setting anybody's world on fire, because the following year brought us Wonder Boy 3 Monster Layer, which goes back to a style more reminiscent of the original. Remember, the second game being some strange outlier wasn't unusual back in those days. Get Zelda 2 or Mario 2, American Mario 2. They experimented and then went back to the original style. No towns, no equipment, no swords or shields, just keep moving against a tropical platforming environment, collecting food to keep your strength up. The big difference now is that the focus has shifted from pure platforming to something more akin to a shmup. Every other stage is even more pure shmup. Yeah, with the different weapon types and enemy waves and everything. It's just... not a good one. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this game. It feels like an awkward mix of the original and something new without being particularly interesting at either. Maybe that mediocrity is why the ports are way more under control this time. Or maybe it was just too demanding for computers of the era. After all, it couldn't be ported to the Master System and instead waited for the Genesis for a home conversion. That means no weird title changes. Both the Japanese and European Mega Drive versions were called Wonder Boy 3 Monster Layer. Now, the weird part is that we in the States never received this conversion in its day. Yeah, Americans didn't get this until the digital era. You know what we did get though? Hudson's TurboGrafx CD version just called Monster Layer. Yeah, was that so hard, Hudson? You don't need to come up with some new IP or license some candy mascot. The agreement just means you can't use the Wonder Boy name. Well, actually, this is where it gets the most complicated yet. See, in Japan, The game is called Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair. With the Wonder Boy name. No one knows how the hell they got away with that one. But regardless of the legality, it's at least easy to follow. At this point, Wonder Boy had become a yearly series, so when 1989 rolled around, we should know what to expect. Wonder Boy 4, a platformer with some new gimmick to draw players to the cabinets. So, nobody was surprised when the next installment of the franchise hit in '89, as Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap. Wonder Boy 3.
So now it's not just regional names, the second game not being called 2, and spin-offs that somehow spawned their own series, but 2 games called 3.
So the question now becomes, if both of these games are referred to as Wonder Boy 3, which one is the true successor? Well, since they both have a claim to that in terms of gameplay, the Dragon's Trap following in Monsterland's footsteps, let's take a look at the timeline. Much like Symphony of the Night, Dragon's Trap opens up with an optimistic retelling of the previous game's ending, with Bach's battle against Mecha Dragon. Meanwhile, Monster Lair says that Bach's heroic deeds have been passed down the generations. Yeah, you're not even playing as Bach, but 2 new characters named Leo and Princess Purapil. Aside from the gameplay similarities, which, change the visual design and the health system and it's already gone, just removing that backstory bit is enough to completely remove Monster Lair from the Wonder Boy mythos. Maybe it's because I didn't enjoy Monster Lair, but that's enough for me to declare Dragon's Trap the worthier follow-up. And also because Dragon's Trap is cool on its own. Though he defeats Mecha Dragon, Bach is stricken by a curse that transforms him into a dragon, sending him on a quest to defeat the other dragons of the land and obtain the Salamander Cross to lift the curse. Accomplishing this requires traversing the land, exploring domains deep in the wilds, and slowly expanding your paths forward as Bach gets transformed into other creatures. While the setting and equipment systems are taken from Monsterland, the console exclusivity means they can expand it. An open world, multiple equipment items to purchase, and varied environments. It's an early Metroidvania, but unlike its contemporaries Metroid 1 and Castlevania 2, it holds up. However, despite its quality, the game didn't hit Japan for another 3 years. I mean, I know the Mark III wasn't popular in Japan, but we got the game in the States. They didn't get it until the Game Gear port, but instead of keeping the name the rest of the world knew it as, they changed it to Monster World 2. Keep in mind that Monsterland's Mark III port was known as Monster World.
So this comes down to the reason there are 2 Wonder Boy 3s. They're technically part of separate series. Much like how The Crawlers and Quest for the Mighty Sword can both be called Troll 3 because they're technically different series, in what is surely my deepest cut yet.
And it exists in the Monica continuity too, I assume. Yes, once again, the game was localized in Brazil as Turma da Monica im o Resgate, or Monica's Gang to the Rescue. Bach is replaced by Monica, but in an amazing twist, all the creature transformations are replaced by other characters from the comic. The dragon form is now Chuck Billy, the mouse form is Blue, and the fish is Jimmy 5, if any of those names mean a damn thing. It's so dumb, I love it. Like, imagine if some country got new Super Mario Bros., but the characters were replaced with the cast of Peanuts and nothing else was different. So, what was Hudson doing? Releasing another TurboGrafx game, of course, Dragon's Curse. Aside from a different translation that contains a humorous tone that I'm not a fan of, and a slightly recolored main character, it's exactly the same. There, was that so hard, Hudson? You don't need to come up with some new IP or license some candy mascot. The agreement just means you can't use the Wonder Boy name. Well, actually, this is where it gets the most complicated yet. See, in Japan, the game is called Adventure Island. There's absolutely no other differences, just a name change for marquee value that only makes everything more confusing than it absolutely needs to be. Wonder Boy took 1990 off, but returned in 1991 with Wonder Boy in Monster World, the first time we and the rest of the world had heard the Monster World name. And much like its predecessor, it's an open-world RPG-inspired platformer, but without any transformations, just one character. I don't know if anyone thought all the transformations were overwhelming, or if they thought they couldn't do it well enough since Dragon's Trap didn't allow you to officially swap forms on the fly, but it can be said to be more in line with Monsterland's vein in that sense. In fact, this game starts off on the same screen as that game. And where does it fall on the timeline? Well, after, I guess. No Bach this time. Our protagonist is named Shion, and I don't even know if he is related to Bach. Hell, I don't even know if this is supposed to be the same world, considering it's called Monster World now, instead of Monsterland like the previous games, which was just what the monsters renamed Wonderland to when they took over.
I'd ask whether this was a translation error in the first place, but finding information on these games is so hard that it'd honestly be easier for me to just learn Japanese and translate them myself.
Oh, but wait, there's a connection. Purapro, the princess from Monster Lair, is apparently the name of a whole royal lineage. So the game has more connection to the one game that is definitively not a Monster World game. But the name probably raises more questions. Japan already had a game called Super Wonder Boy in Monster World years before, so were they sold a sequel that sounded like a lesser version of a prior game? Oh no, don't you worry about that. Japan got a beautifully eloquent title. Wonder Boy 5 Monster World 3.
Alright, so fuck it. There's clearly no point in trying to separate these series if they're just going to continue concurrently. I guess it's like how Persona games carried the Shin Megami Tensei name prior to 5, but at least they didn't count as main Shin Megami Tensei games. It's not like the existence of 5 Persona games meant we're getting Shin Megami Tensei 10. I mean, we're not getting Shin Megami Tensei 5 either.
Oh, and the existence of a 5 in the title means that the series either pulled a Leisure Suit Larry with a missing 4th chapter, or we're just supposed to accept that both games called Wonder Boy 3 count. The Dynastic Hero? Oh yeah, Hudson's TurboGrafx release. Same game, changed graphics with an insect theme, animated cutscenes. There was a Monica version too. Are we done now?
I don't always know what to say, but now I must show I can do the right thing.
This time, Westone waited 3 years for the next Genesis entry, Monster World 4. It's like they finally realized that the Monster World entries have a specific style that the Wonder Boy entries do not, so they should be separated. Or maybe they changed the title because Wonder Boy would be inaccurate with Asha as our lead. What, and Princess Purple wasn't enough? Come on, her descendant even appears in the game, sending Asha off on her quest to save Monster World from impending doom. So, we're back with the Monster World name for our setting, which means this is a sequel to, well, Monster World. Listen, after Monster World's tenuous connection to Monsterland and Dragon's Trap, this wasn't guaranteed. I guess the series just works in pairs. It's not the only connection either. The 4 spirits Asha rescues are Shion's 4 companions, and the final boss, Fear Incarnate, is Biomecha from the previous game. And what about the regional differences? The ports? What sorts of weird titles and conversions are we looking at here? None. Maybe 94 was a little late in the Genesis life, but Monster World 4 never left Japan and Hudson kept their hands off it. That is, until 2012 when it was given a digital release worldwide with an official translation and everything. But before that, the scarcity resulting from the one game in the series never leaving Japan sprung up a cult following. And also because it's good. At the end of the day, I prefer Dragon's Trap because it's more full-featured, as Monster World 4 cut things like choosing equipment for reasons beyond a straight line of effectiveness, and the open world. But the play control and characters have never been better. And thus marks the conclusion of the Monster World series, formerly and concurrently known as the Wonder Boy series. Though far from being mainstays, the games would make semi-regular appearances on various Sega collections, including one of M2's dedicated collections that only Japan was lucky enough to get, and Monster World 4 was even chosen as one of the system's defining games for inclusion in the Genesis Mini.
Rocket Knight, ooh, I'm not still bitter over that.
Nowadays, while there's no single way to play them all, a little console hopping is all you need to get every official entry. So, what did Westone do past the series where they got their start? I mean, aside from their magnum opus, Jaws for the NES. Well, they made plenty of games notable enough to have Wikipedia pages, but none that I've heard of. Oh, wait, it looks like they've actually made an appearance on my show before. At least, Wikipedia claims they worked on Ayanami Raising Project, but I don't know where they got that information. Perhaps they just didn't have enough of a spark without Wonder Boy because Westone closed their doors in 2014. Then, much like exploitation directors, as soon as Westone died, Wonder Boy made his triumphant return. It was a hell of a return, and one that had to be just as confusing as the lineage that spawned it. 3 new games, all completely unrelated to one another, all made by different independent teams, yet all with Sega's blessing. I guess it's like with Shenmue, they'll just let other people make the games. Starting in 2016, we got a remake of the original Wonder Boy from CFK titled Wonder Boy Returns. Unless you're buying it on the Switch, where it's instead called Wonder Boy Returns Remix. Then, 2017 brought us Wonder Boy The Dragon's Trap, another remake this time from Lizard Cube. Actually, this one was the first one I played that sent me down this path, and it's an excellent remake. Looks great, sounds great, plays almost identical to the original, and just goes to show how well that game holds up. If you have to play one game in this series, make it that one. That's only if you ask me though. The game that got universal praise upon release from critics and audiences was 2018's Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, developed by Game Atelier. Despite the weird mashup title, this is another game in the same continuity, I'm pretty sure officially recognized. It's got some modern updates like more story, a bigger world, and on-the-fly transformations, but I just found it too bloated with story sequences, backtracking in bigger areas, and some real annoying puzzles and enemy placement. I played most of it on a rental and I wasn't a fan. Doesn't mean I'm not disappointed the Quackshot remake pitch went nowhere. Not to mention, Monster Boy just has to go confusing the mythos even further. The church has a series of stained glass windows depicting the previous heroes of the land, with Boy, Bach, Shion, and Asha. But weren't Boy and Bach the same person? According to the Dragon's Trap remake, that's still true. And if they were just paying homage to Wonder Boy for being a distinct game that spawned Monster World, then where's Leo's window? Just think. One little arcade game to capitalize on a new platformer craze started by our dear friend Mario 1 year prior spawned so much. There was even a Wonder Boy movie in 2017. I haven't seen it, but looking through the plot synopsis, it seems they took a drastically different direction. While I don't think the arcadey nature of the pure Wonder Boy games would hold up over extended play, the Monster World games are interesting experiments in retro design, and if that sounds cool to you, I think they're worth exploring. At least for some historical value. I've never seen it brought up, but there's some part of me that refuses to believe that Shantae was not inspired by Monster World, especially Dragon's Trap. The 2D platformer / open world hybrid with dungeons and animal transformations are a dead ringer. Combine that with Monster World 4's Arabian aesthetic and female protagonist with a ponytail and a penchant for booty shaking, and you've got the prototypical Shantae. There's some fascinating games, maybe not always fun, but yet another series that has been locked up in Sega's vault for so long, and is now living a new life thanks to fans. Fans that love this series for all its weird bullshit. And you know how I know they love the weird bullshit? For everyone that missed the pointless reskins, there's a fan mod for the Dragon's Trap remake that reinstitutes Monika's gang.
And that's why these videos will never stop being made, because this bullshit never ends.
History of Wonder